I've not worked for minimum wage since I was a teenager when I was not supporting myself. But
Okay.
every time since then, I have a college degree, and so I have worked. I've been insulated from the minimum wage.
I have worked for minimum wage. It was too many years to remember, probably about 20, 25 years ago. I was a waitress in college. I think the minimum wage was $2.01 for waitresses, which may still be the same. And of course, tips.
I worked when I was 16, I worked at a movie theater for about 3 years. And it was right when I think minimum wage was like $4.75. And while I was there, it jumped to $5.15. So I worked there, then I also worked at another job, pretty much a filtering plant where they created the filter bags. You pretty much just had to sit in the machine and put the bag in the machine, and it would just feed into a machine and just dump the coal in there. So.
When I was in college, I went to college in the 1980s. The labor market was really, really rough back then, so we had unemployment that got as high as 11% at that time. And you were very grateful to get a job that paid minimum wage. All of the minimum wage jobs that I had were in the restaurant and fast food industry.
Okay, when I started out in my work career some 40 years ago, I worked for $1.77. I thought that was a lot of money. And whenever you look at where the minimum wage is now 40 years later, and it's only $5.50 an hour, that's not a lot of gain from whenever I started out as a young person working for the minimum wage. So, long time ago.
Yeah, I worked at McDonald's when I was 14 for a summer. But I actually supported myself on not much more than minimum wage for several years. I worked at actually a Ben & Jerry's, and I had dropped out of school, and I was paying my own rent and bills and everything for the first time on $6.15 an hour, which I think is actually the minimum wage now, but at the time it wasn't. It was like $1 above.
I worked for the minimum wage when I first entered the workforce in lots of jobs. So I think the first jobs I had were $1.60 an hour back in the late 60s, which is, as I understand it, that $1.60 an hour is what we sort of applied a formula for inflation to get to this 936. So I started at the 1968 equivalent of $9.36 an hour.
I think I'd be able to eat better. We eat a lot of fast food and cheap things, and it's funny that they say that if they raise the minimum wage, small businesses would get less money, because when I shop at Walmart or when I shop at fast food chains, it's because I don't have much money. I think I would be giving a lot more of my money to small businesses if I had more.
I think a major effect of it would be that more people would have more time to be more engaged in the community, and that would affect my life by allowing me to engage with more people, because there would be more people with more free time and more time to participate in various activities.
I work for well above the minimum wage right now, so it wouldn't economically impact me. Where it would impact me is that I would be living in a community where I feel like people look each other in the eye with kind of mutual recognition of we are all dignified people here, and that's the main way. I just want to live in a community that I know is taking care of its people better.
Well, I think that having people being able to make enough money where they can have quality housing, that they can actually demand that, as opposed to having to accept substandard housing because they can't make enough money. Being able to engage with their children, being home with their families, having downtime so that they can enjoy life just as much as anybody else. Those are things that, and then they also become better contributors, because a lot of what we contribute in our community doesn't have anything to do with money. It has to do with people being willing to give back, either through volunteering for a scout troop or volunteering to help sit with an elderly person or those kinds of things. But if you're working 20 hours a day, just to be able to make ends meet, you don't have time to deal with quality of life things for yourself or anybody else.
I should say I volunteer with an organization called Food Not Bombs that serves free meals in Greensboro. And we see a lot of people who are working, but they can't make it. And it's painful to live in a city where it is acceptable to people to have other people living and working in that way.
One of the most important ones I see is that right now people are working 2, sometimes 3 jobs in order to keep food on the table and a roof over the head. And because of that, they're not home doing the things they need to be doing with their families. And they certainly don't have time to be participating in community conversations about how they want their world to look. And so for me, raising the minimum wage is part and parcel of increasing the potential for democracy to happen in our community. And that's really important to me.
When you raise the minimum wage, you give people the opportunity, like I said, to provide for their families. We're not talking about fancy houses, saving for college for their children. We're talking about basic living expenses, heating, which is also out of the roof, gas out of the roof, providing food, and we're not talking steak and baked potatoes for their family, just the basic needs for their family. That does not include clothing, medical expenses, those type of things that people need, that they can feel as though that they're providing for their families the way that they should. The minimum wage does not allow for you to do all of that, so you have to cut back on some things, and most of the time it's healthcare expenses and food for their families.
I have friends who make $85 an hour, $100 an hour, $120 an hour, who are in professional positions. An hour of their life is not worth more than the hour of the life of some of my friends who come through that bombs. I think the greatest benefit in the end will not be economic, but will actually be sort of moral and spiritual.
The positive effect from a minimum wage is that the people who keep their jobs get more income and can spend more. The negative effect of a minimum wage is that it costs employers more to hire people. And if it costs too much to hire people, employers will either cut back on hours or cut back on the number of people that they hire. So depending on how much the minimum wage was changed, there's actually a possibility that people could lose their jobs as a result of that.
Businesses have hired the people that they need, and I can't imagine that there'd be any loss of jobs if they were paying people more, because they need the people that they've hired, especially the people that are making minimum wage, like janitorial staff, library assistants. All of those people are, kind of vital to the community, and I don't see how it really discouraged businesses from coming in, because there already aren't many businesses coming in.
Usually when there's a raise in the wage, I would think that the people who are affected are the people who are making that kind of income. People who are making, if you have an office job where you're making $15 an hour, maybe a raise in the minimum wage doesn't hurt anything. But if you're working at a McDonald's and there's a bump in the minimum wage, maybe they'll have one less worker working, for a few hours instead of, and maybe the people who are working, they'll have to work a little bit harder, just so that the company will be able to keep the same, income or something like that going.
If you look at it purely from an economic standpoint, it's possible that it would decrease profits for some businesses. But even that, I'm not sure that would happen. I think that the same businesses that would be paying more to their workers might also have more income because there'd be more people to spend money.
Well, one of the backlashes that the reality that we have to deal with is that employers are going to figure out a way that if they are required to pay a livable wage, that they're going to cut people's hours, they're going to cut benefits to people. My thinking is that if say we got an employer that has 20 people that he's hired, well, if he's got to pay that additional money, he's probably going to cut that staff. He's probably going to have only 2 of those people to be full-time, which would probably be the supervisor. And so, instead of a person working 40 hours a week, a person might wind up working 20 hours a week, And if you really were to divide that out over a 40-hour week, they still wind up making about the net gain of what they were making when they were making the lower minimum wage.
I'd spend more money at them. They get more of my money. I hate eating at chains, and I hate spending my money at large chain stores. And you know, the little specialty shops downtown, I would spend my money there if I had more. And it just seems like it would be a stimulus to the economy, and I don't really see how it would affect, especially the businesses that employ large groups of very people that are paid very low.
I know there are some small businesses that are already choosing to pay a livable wage or close to the $9.36 minimum wage. And right now those businesses are kind of penalized because other businesses are not also required to do that, that they have to make a choice that could put them at a competitive disadvantage with other businesses. But if everyone's required to do it, it'll kind of level the playing field so that all small local businesses will be expected to treat the workers fairly.
Well, if the attitude that we've been getting so far is, I think it's not going to be an economic stimulus for us. I think that the attitude that we've seen already from the emails we've gotten, particularly for the smaller business person, is that this is going to, you know, hurt them, hurt their bottom line. But again, I think that we as a governmental entity need to encourage any employers coming to town to already have a wage set that is at that level where people can actually make a good living and have benefits. We have people wanting to come to Greensboro and come to North Carolina because they find us a cheap labor state. Okay? And so until we raise that bar for all of our citizens, we're going to continue to be dumped upon as people saying, well, we can go to North Carolina because, you know, we don't have to pay as high a wage, and since we're there's a right to work state, then we don't support a whole lot of unions and that kind of stuff. So people find us attractive, and you know, I think that we need to, whenever someone comes to town, say to them, hey, you know, we need for you to have jobs that pay a livable wage or better, and we need for you to provide benefits not just for your full-time employees, but also for your part-time employees.
If I'm a worker and I've been there, let's say I've been there for 3 years, and I'm making, you know, maybe $7.50 an hour, and then somebody who's only been there a day is making, you know, whatever the minimum wage is now, and then the next day everybody gets bumped up to $9 and some change an hour. I'm probably not going to get a proportional increase over the minimum wage. I'm probably going to get $9 an hour, and the other person who's only been there for 2 days, they're going to get $9 something an hour, and that's not fair to me. I've been there for 3 years. Why should we get paid the same? But as a business owner, they're probably thinking, well, you know, why should I pay you more? I wasn't even paying you $9 an hour before. Now I'm paying you $2. I've given you a $2 raise. So I think for business owners, I think that's really going to be bad for Greensboro, to force people to force business owners to pay their workers more than what they really deserve.
Local businesses that don't compete outside of Greensboro probably wouldn't affect them too much. For businesses that send their products out to the rest of the country, or that compete with other businesses across the state and across the country, it would put them at a disadvantage.
Intellectually and morally, I feel like it's the right thing to do. But on the other side, I'm conflicted because I don't know where the money's going to come from.
Wages right now, for the most part, are set between individual employers and individual job applicants. So it's a result of a negotiation between those groups.
Right now, not enough people have a say over it, and that we really should all have a say over the conditions that workers are treated by in the society. And right now it's not a very democratic process. There's just a few people who own the companies that get to choose how the many, many people who work for them get paid, and I think it's a lot more fair to let the people who are affected by those wages take part in deciding what is a fair wage for the work they do.
Well, I guess the person that does that is the person who generates the job. I mean, because if I'm a business person and I'm the person that decides I want to press myself out here to own a business and then, you know, move it out to where I can hire people, then I should have some say-so into what that wage should be.
Markets generally work best when we let the people who are in those markets set the prices. So as much as possible, we want to leave the government out and let the markets themselves set the price. That is, the people whose services are going to be transacted in that market. Let them work with it. We typically only let the government, we only want the government to get involved if there's some sort of a problem in that market.
The sort of free market folks think the market should determine everything. You know, if there's somebody out there willing to work for $5 an hour, and this business owner wants to pay $5 an hour, let it be. But I think that the community suffers. It's not just the right of a single business owner and a single worker to make that decision between themselves, because it has ramifications for the wider community. So I think the community has to set standards about what is the lowest wage it's going to tolerate. So that, because what happens when there are people making low wages, it externalizes the real cost of that person's employment onto the wider community, and the rest of us pay when there is gross inequality and people living on not enough money.
$9 plus strikes me as a really high minimum wage. One thing that the campaign needs to think about very carefully is what the impact is going to be on part-time workers and secondary workers. The campaign wants to improve conditions for one group of workers who are essentially breadwinners in households, but there are other workers, and you face a really uncomfortable set of trade-offs with respect to those workers.
I firmly believe that citizens have a right and a role to play in pressuring the elected officials to hear and be sensitive to the needs of the people, whether it's about minimum wages, whether it's about quality of life, whether it's about housing. That's the role that we, have to play.
Whoever has control over this decision needs to consider everyday people in general. And these are the people that want to earn an honest living. You always hear a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. Well, that's not the case. But consider those people that are at the poverty level, so that they will not remain at that level, and that they don't raise children that will grow up to be adults one day, so that they can be productive, law-abiding. That is so important. Law-abiding citizens.
People are working not only one, but sometimes 2 or 1.5 jobs just to sustain a family. If we gave our citizens a reasonable living wage, then they would not have to be so much time away from their family, and that would not only provide jobs for other people. The minimum wage wouldn't have an adverse impact on the corporate structure. They would pay the people what they're worth, and that person working 1.5 jobs could possibly sustain a family on 1 job. That would leave an opening for someone else to work.
I was an American Studies major in college, and so I have read the concerns that people had when there was a campaign against child labor, and that how that would impact families, how that would close factories. It didn't. It doesn't. When you do the right thing, the world adjusts.
I totally agree. Yes, because I work hard. I know you do. I work hard, do I not? Son, yes. And we should not live. That's right. And my car is over there broke down now. It's either the gas bill or get my car fixed. And what am I gonna do?
That's right.
Pay the gas bill. That's right.
That's it.
That's right. And had to get a little bit of food. It was either get the food or don't have no dinner. So I had to get the food.
That's right.
Get the food, pay the yeah. I appreciate it. It's true.
That's it.
It's real.
Well, thank you. Well, spread
Thank
the word
y'all.
and talk
Thank
to
you.
your neighbors.
And I'm going to go in here and go online.
Okay.
And I'm going to do it now.
All right, great.
That's right. I appreciate it. I didn't know what y'all was doing. I ain't going to lie. I did not